For years ago it looked like nothing more than but today Englot is a story that people can't ignore even if they try. For years of glances, tension, and a connection that no one has been able to clearly define. Today, April 4, 2026, marks exactly 4 years since people first started noticing that something about Engfa Waraha and Charlotte Austin did not feel like a normal interaction inside the industry, and from that moment what seemed like a coincidence slowly turned into a story that refuses to fade or become simple. Back in 2022 at Miss Grand Thailand, everything was built on competition, control, and image, a space where every move is calculated and every emotion is filtered, and yet despite that structure there were moments between them that felt unplanned, unscripted, and almost too real to belong to that environment. It started with details that were easy to miss if you were not paying attention, glances that lasted just a little longer than necessary, reactions that did not match the situation, a kind of comfort that does not usually exist between people who just met inside a high-pressure competition, and those small details quickly became impossible to ignore because they created a pattern. That was the moment when the name Minglad appeared, at first as a simple way to label what people were seeing, but very quickly it became something else, something that carried weight because it was tied to a dynamic that kept evolving instead of disappearing. Throughout 2022 and into 2023 their interactions became more frequent and more noticeable, and every appearance together added another layer to the feeling that this was not just professional chemistry, because their conversations did not feel rehearsed, their timing did not feel planned, and the way they reacted to each other often broke the expected rhythm of interviews and public appearances. There were moments of teasing that felt too natural, moments of support that felt too specific, and moments of silence that somehow said more than anything they could have verbalized, and this combination created a tension that kept people watching. What made it even stronger was the fact that the story was never stable, because from 2022 to 2025 their path was full of shifts that made everything feel unpredictable. There were periods where they were almost constantly together, working on projects, appearing in interviews, doing fan meetings, going live and showing a version of themselves that felt less controlled and more real, and during those times the connection between them seemed obvious to the point where people started questioning whether it could still be explained as just work. But then there were other periods where things changed, where they appeared separately more often, where their interactions became less visible, and where the absence created even more tension than their presence ever did. Those were the moments when discussions became louder, when people started asking if something had happened, if there was distance, if the dynamic had shifted in a way that could not be reversed, and each time it felt like the story was close to breaking. But every time that narrative started to settle, something else would happen. They would appear together again, interact in a way that immediately erased the idea of an ending, and bring everything back into uncertainty. This repeated pattern became one of the defining elements of Englot, the constant movement between closeness and distance without ever fully losing the connection. One of the most defining phases came in 2025 during their European tour across Paris, Barcelona, and London, because this was a context where the usual structure of the industry was less dominant and where more spontaneous moments could exist. In that environment their dynamic felt different, less like something tied to schedules and more like something that existed regardless of them, and that shift made people pay even closer attention because it blurred the line between public and personal even further. The way they interacted during that time felt more relaxed but at the same time more intense, as if the connection did not need to be performed anymore and could simply exist. And yet despite everything that has happened over these 4 years, one fact has never changed: neither Engfa nor Charlotte has ever officially confirmed a romantic relationship, not once, not even indirectly, and that absence of confirmation is exactly what keeps the story alive. They talk about closeness, about respect, about support, about how important they are to each other, but they never define it in a way that would end the speculation, and this creates a space where the reality of what they are and the perception of what people believe they are continue to exist at the same time. When it comes to their personal lives, there have been no publicly confirmed long-term relationships with other people during these years, despite occasional rumors and attempts to connect them to others, and because none of those narratives lasted, their connection remained the only consistent thread that continued from the beginning until now. When you look closely at their dynamic, there is a balance that makes it feel even more real. Engfa often appears more composed and protective, someone who holds the situation together, while Charlotte comes across as more open and emotionally expressive, but at the same time she often drives the emotional tone of their interactions, and this shifting balance prevents their connection from ever feeling static or performative. Now in April 2026 their story feels different compared to how it started, because it is quieter but at the same time stronger, less about visible moments and more about presence, and this stage feels like something that no longer needs validation from the outside. They still appear together, still interact, still create moments that people notice, but the energy has changed. It feels more controlled, more grounded, and in a way more difficult to interpret. And that is exactly what makes it even more compelling, because when something becomes less obvious it often means it has gone deeper rather than disappeared. The biggest question now is no longer whether there is something between them, but how long this connection can continue in an environment that constantly changes and applies pressure, especially when considering possibilities like Charlotte's contract eventually coming to an end, which could shift their public dynamic and reduce the number of shared projects. But looking at their history, it becomes clear that their connection has never depended entirely on work or external structures, because it has continued through different phases, through distance, through changes, and through uncertainty. That is why even if the format around them changes, it does not automatically mean that the connection itself will disappear. It may simply evolve into something less visible but more personal, or something that exists outside the expectations that have been placed on them from the beginning. After 4 years, Englot is no longer just a pairing or a moment. It is an ongoing process without a clear definition, a tension that never fully resolves, and a connection that remains impossible to ignore because it continues to exist without giving a final answer. What makes this even more interesting right now is the fact that they have already passed the phase where everything feels new and uncertain, because 4 years is not a short period inside an industry that constantly replaces stories with new ones, and the fact that their dynamic is still relevant means that something about it continues to resonate beyond trends or temporary attention. This is exactly the point where most pairings either fade away or get clearly defined, but Englot is doing neither, and that creates a different kind of anticipation where people are no longer waiting for confirmation, but rather watching how the story continues to unfold without it, paying attention to the details and the patterns that keep repeating and slowly evolving over time. If Charlotte's contract ends, it could remove the structure that kept them consistently visible together, but at the same time it could also remove limitations, making the situation even more unpredictable because it opens the door to a version of their connection that is not shaped by schedules, projects, or expectations. And that is where the real question begins, not whether they will stay the same, but whether what they have can exist in a completely different context where there is no obligation to appear together, no external pressure to maintain a dynamic, and no clear reason to continue showing up side by side except for their own choice and their own intentions. How long do you think they will stay like this, and what will really happen if Charlotte's contract ends? And will that moment change everything or prove that what they have goes beyond the industry itself? Because this could be the point where everything either quietly fades or finally becomes something undeniable that no longer needs to be explained or hidden behind careful words. Congratulate them in the comments on this milestone and like the video if you truly love this pair, because after 4 years of uncertainty, tension, and moments that kept everyone watching, they have already created something that people are still trying to understand, and that alone makes this story worth following until the very end.